Welcome to Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. I'm your host for this session. I'm Sean.
And I'm Kevin.
And together we're going to talk about a unique problem that you might be having in your sales process and your sales world. This 15 minutes is designed for salespeople, sales managers, and CEOs of the company that are trying to increase their revenue and trying to be more productive in your sales processes. So let's get started. Welcome back to Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. And Kevin, today we have a special guest with us. We have Tim Warren, who's the founder and CEO of Helium SEO. I probably just butchered that. You might call it slightly something else, Tim, and I apologize for that. Why don't you do your intro, tell us about you, tell us about your background, and tell us about your company as well.
Yeah, Sean, thanks. And Kevin, great to see you guys again. Thanks for having me on the Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. I don't know if I'm tall enough to count as one of the tall guys, but I'm 6'1". Is it three tall guys talking sales now? I don't know. Maybe we count. But
and two people are as tall as Kevin. He has to duck when he goes through some doors.
Okay, two tall guys and one almost tall guy talking sales. Thanks, guys, for having me on. My name is Tim. I run a company in town called Helium SEO. We have about 50, 60 employees. We have doubled 4 out of the last 5 years. We recently were just named in Inc. magazine, Inc. 5000, the number 48th fastest growing agency in the US out of the top 50. It's been a wild ride. It's been a ton of fun. If you're not familiar with our business, what we do is we build very technical, engineering-focused SEO and SEM campaigns for mid-size and enterprise clients. And we also specialize in automotive dealerships. What our business does is we'll go in for the Watsons and the PetSmarts and the Xavier universities and the myriad neurosciences of the world. And we go in and we look at it and say, with this type of entity SEO and these IA tools, we can produce a way higher performing SEO campaign, way higher performing PPC campaigns. And generally, we're able to drive hundreds of % more ROI for clients than we're currently getting with SEO and SEM. We're low funnel digital marketing, helping business owners grow. So that's a little bit of my background. I actually was a med student. I've got a weird story. I went to med school. I was interested in business because I wanted to make money on the side. So I started studying business. I started enjoying the business stuff more than the med school stuff. I quit med school to then focus on business full time. But I read a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And that book said, if you want to be a business owner and entrepreneur, you got to learn how to sell. Robert Kiyosaki, he got a sales job at I think Xerox. He lived in Hawaii and he became, after 5 years, like the top sales guy or in his division or the company or whatever in Hawaii. And he said that experience taught him so much about business. I read the book and said, I should start with sales. My first job after med school, my first sales job was door-to-door cable sales in Columbus in the middle of the winter, commission only. And that was a baptism of fire for sales. I was terrible. I was selling against Time Warner Cable, and I was so bad I couldn't get people to switch off of Time Warner to a cheaper, better product. But what I would do is I'd sell during the day and go home and read books on sales at night, listen to CDs at the time, which if for those of you listening under 25, this is a disc. You'd put into a player, it would play. Like now on your phone, you hit play on the podcast, but then I would go back and sell, and eventually I became one of the top sales guys. I could make $1,000 a day selling cable, and that was kind of the start of my sales career. And from there, off to better things. So I've run multiple companies, I've bought companies, I've sold companies, and my journey has always included and been really passionate about sales, sales management, sales leadership. A little bit of my story.
Wow, that's quite the resume. We've definitely got the right guy on the podcast to talk about really big sales problems. Sean and I fashion ourselves as two tall guys, but this is definitely some real tall challenges that you have overcome. Can you tell us about your leadership journey as a sales leader and maybe some of the tipping points that you've experienced going from good to great or mediocre to back to good?
Oh man, that's a really good question. I'll tell you one of the biggest things I've had to learn in the process is that sales is like sports in that star salespeople typically don't make great coaches. And the best coaches, like the Phil Jacksons, people didn't even know he played basketball. Phil Jackson played basketball? I've heard of Jerry West and Pistol Pete, but who the heck is Phil Jackson? No, he played. But everyone knows that he coached Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan. But everyone knows Michael Jordan is not a coach and he'd be a terrible coach. But then Steve Kerr, he's a role player and he was a good basketball player. It was okay. He's a great coach. Look at Steph Curry and these teams. One of the first things I've learned, Kevin, in sales management and sales leadership, it's two very different. They're both really critical, though. But it's knowing where you play, and it's making the mental shift of, if you're a great salesperson, people listening here, if you're a business owner and you're growing via sales, you're probably a great salesperson. You're great at selling your product. And so was I when I first started. But becoming a sales manager is a very different animal. Sales coaching is such a different thing. It's working on the details of the process. What's the commission plan, and being intelligent about how that scales? Looking at Salesforce and what's in the pipeline, and pipeline management, time management, and coaching and organizing, and not being the star, building stars. And that was a really hard shift for me when I winning awards and rookie of the year and accolades and making all these sales things. Like, well, I don't want that guy to win. I want to win. It wasn't until my second company, or second successful company, that I realized, well, if I'm the star forever, I'll never be able to grow or scale anything, because you're the star. You can't build stars. There's no 150, 200, $300 million companies where the CEO is the best sales guy. Maybe one, but that's going to be really rare. It's going to be systems and processes that don't require the owner. For me, Kevin, the journey was realizing, if I really want to scale something, I have to learn how to build something that runs without me ever coming to the business. And so I can't do that by being the star sales guy. I have to learn how to build superstars.
Fantastic. Building people. Sean and I are just foaming at the mouth, because that's such good content there. Building people is what makes organizations successful. Could you frame that up, Sean, on how you've built the journey of the people on the team?
It was interesting, Tim. I was sitting in your office just catching up because we hadn't seen each other in a while. And you told that story of trying to build your sales team. And you did a great job, and I'm going to screw it up if I try to do it. But you talked about that you had to accept that salespeople had to grow themselves, and you had to accept that that was okay. So can you kind of frame that up for our listeners?
My first SEO company I started in 2013. It's called SEO Exposed. Kind of the idea was we would go to business owners and expose what SEO really was and what they were paying for, which in most cases was nothing. They're paying $1,000 a month, getting nothing. That's a whole other conversation. But that was kind of how I got started into SEO, is just seeing a lot of these business owners are getting scammed, spending money and they're getting nothing for it. In terms of growing people, my first company, we tried so many salespeople. We tried commission only, then we tried base salaries, and we'd hire people, we'd coach them. But then after 6 months, they just would never be able to sell the way I could sell. I could sell $1 million, $1.5 million a year in new client contracts, and they're selling a couple $100,000 a year maybe, and just wasn't working. When I sold that company, I kind of got to a place where I was like, maybe it's not possible. Maybe you can't scale sales here. Maybe agencies, salespeople don't work. But I got a really good encouragement from a CEO. I think it was a CEO friend of mine, or executive coach who I was friends with. And he gave me this really interesting piece of advice, which was, he said, hey, Tim, when you're thinking about growing people, can you outsell one salesperson? Yeah, I was always the top sales guy. I was a great sales guy. Could you outsell 3 salespeople? Maybe, probably. Pretty good at selling SEO. Could you outsell 10 salespeople? No, I couldn't outsell 10. Could you outsell 25? No, not even close. What do you mean? And he said, you're thinking about it wrong. He said, as the business owner, you are going to know your product better than anybody on the planet. You're going to have total conviction beyond anybody else. And you can make changes on the fly that no one else can make. You can say, okay, we can discount that. We can give you this. No one has the power to do that, but you do. And you have this title. People want to get sold to, not by a salesperson, but by a CEO. He said, you have all these advantages. Of course, you're going to be able to outsell any new salesperson. That's a given. Oh, but if you are always the person outselling them, you'll never be able to scale. Your businesses will always be small. And to me, that was the turning point of, I didn't want to only have small businesses. I wanted to have a big impact and build something of scale. And I saw what businesses at 100 million, 200 million were doing. I'm like, I want to go there. And so his encouragement to me when it came to growing my own thinking and growing people was, you have to build a team of people that as a team can outperform what you can do. But also the cool thing is, when you first start that team, Each new salesperson is not going to sell $1 million their first year. It's not going to happen. They might sell 350 their first year. Then the next year they sell 700. Then the next year they sell $1 million. And if you can sell $1 million, well, over 3 years, that rep now can sell what you can sell or more. But then if you hire 5 or 10 or 15 of those, the amount of sales that they can do is astronomically more than you could do as an owner. And you don't do any of the sales. They sell whether you're there or not, which is true duplication, which is usually why people start companies. They want to duplicate their time and energy. So those are some of the major pieces I had to learn, growth in my own thinking, but also understanding how salespeople grow. I was totally disillusioned. I think a lot of business owners are. I'm going to hire a director of business development. I'm going to give this guy a phone and a laptop. All right, Sean, here you go. Make it happen. And you give no systems and no process. And then after the first year, they fail. And it's like, what happened? Why didn't you sell? Did you coach that guy, develop him? Do you have a system? Did you train him? Did you give him the runway he needs? Did you give clear expectations of how much each year? No, of course that guy failed. That's a whole tangent, but we could talk about that for hours.
I'd like to pick at that a little bit because I think some of our listeners out there are probably thinking to themselves, wow, I'm the only person selling. How do I get out of my own way? And we also know that this is a microwave culture. People want results before lunch every day. I'm guessing this didn't happen overnight for you. What was the timeline and progression you kind of had to mentally go through to say, this makes sense?
That's a great question. It is the microwave generation. I talk to agency owners all the time because agencies are notorious for not having sales teams. And they cap out at 3 million, 5 million, 7 million. Why? Well, because you don't have a sales team. That's the most you've been able to sell and retain. You've reached your cap of how much you as a person can. And so Helium's continue to scale because we don't do that. We're constantly trying to hire salespeople and marketing. I don't do the sales for Helium really much at all anymore. Maybe a little bit here or there, but 95% of our deals are sold by the sales team. I guess circle back to that thought, Kevin, is what I think from a process standpoint is you have to be really brutally honest with yourself as a business owner and sit down and say, does this thing I'm doing really scale? Could someone else learn how to do this? And then work backwards from, if I had another salesperson selling $1 million a year, what would I need to have for that person to actually do this? What title would they need? What resources would they need? What would I have to create for them? What scripts do I have to write? What data do I have to give? Database for people to call on? What tools? How do I train them on this one? Like, it's actually working backwards from the goal. Like if you said, I want to run a marathon, you don't just say, okay, well, I'll jump out now in my business clothes and start running. No, you would plan like, that's going to take this much time and training, and here's the clothes I need. It's the same with salespeople. That was not an efficient answer to your question, but I would say that the way to think about it is most of the business owners are not being realistic about what they're doing and how little it will scale, and really thinking about, does the product, the way I'm selling it today, could someone else sell this if you weren't available to sell it? If the answer is no, you need to rethink how you sell it. It has to be a scalable model.
Thank you very much for that. We're going to run out of time. I'm going to ask you a question, but then I'm going to ask you not to answer it, because can you stay on for another podcast and stick around so we can do another one for next week?
Yes.
Cool. I'm going to ask you the question as a preliminary, as a leader for our conversation next week. And if you can come back, that'd be great. And let's give everybody a reason to come back and listen more and get more wisdom from you. Right before we got on this call, you were talking to a customer who was upset or frustrated. And you don't have to give any details. I don't want you to give those details out. But you had to step in and help a customer because they were concerned about some things. Do you find that is a thing that as the CEO that you now are relegated to, or that you have to become good at, and you have to backfill your salesperson who needs help at that critical juncture in the sales process to make it happen? But I don't want you to answer. But I'm glad you can come back. We're right at the end of our 15 minutes. I do appreciate that. If you can come back for next week, that'd be fantastic. We'll dig into that question, dig into some other questions that I know that we all have, and we can continue on this conversation. So thank you very much for your time, Tim. And for everybody out there, you now know how we're going to start the next podcast. And I look forward to you coming back and listening to us again. Welcome to Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. And thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Glad you're here, Tim. And until then, happy selling. And And that's a wrap. Thanks again for joining Kevin and Sean on Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. Tune in every Tuesday, or when our podcast drops every Tuesday at 4:30, wherever you consume your podcast. And don't miss our monthly CEO workshop, where we unpack some of the big CEO questions facing your business. Until next time, we're looking forward to seeing you. Happy selling.